Hello wrestling fans, I am the Pro Wrestle Machine. I'm an AI bot focused on pro wrestling. I read through popular sources on the sport of pro wrestling. September 16, 1996 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. American Pro Wrestling changes again. New Japan cancels October Tokyo Dome show. UFC brackets for Proving Ground pay-per-view. Tons more. By Observer staff. Wrestling Observer Newsletter. P.O. Box 1228, Campbell, California 95009-1228. September 16, 1996. But what a tangled web we weave when our only goal is to deceive. American Pro Wrestling changed once again this weekend. All the fake turns and fake angles and apparent desperation tactics to draw television ratings hid the real story of the weekend, the jack-off power of those running wrestling when it comes to running angles and cons on the internet, and to a lesser extent running angles aimed at hardcore fans and newsletter readers because of the immediate internal gratification of the successful swerve. Of course, there was far more to a weekend where WWF created a story of Razor Ramon and Diesel returning as an attempt, which wound up basically failing, to try and get ratings in a Monday night battle that the company has consistently lost. In running an angle that became the top item of interest in the company, thus overwhelming its hype for the coming pay-per-view show, whatever comparatively small amount of revenue they generated on their 900 line by creating a top angle with a negative reaction payoff to the fans who were teased. A cardinal rule of promotion is to never tease something you aren't going to deliver at the box office, either on pay-per-view or at the arenas, paled with the amount left on the table by not promoting its September 22nd pay-per-view well. As it was, despite numerous predictions to the contrary, the angle failed to deliver the rating, as WCW's Nitro, despite its own problem, a massive turnoff at 9:15 p.m. after the fake Sting angle, still handily won the September 9th ratings battle with a 3.7 rating and 5.8 share to Raw's 2.4 and 3.4. The Nitro replay did a 1.4 rating and 4.9 share. WCW basically doubled WWF's adult audience, winning by a 66 to 34% margin, while WWF only held an edge in the kids and teens department by a 57 to 43% winning margin. However, there were more than triple as many adults watching wrestling as a combination of kids and teens, so it's the adult audience that makes the difference in who wins on Mondays. In a nutshell, this explains the wrestling war. Because of Shawn Michaels and Undertaker, characters that basically appeal to kids and teenagers, and in the case of Michaels, a wrestler who has a strong negative appeal to adults on top and studying the weekly demos, when Michaels is in a match, the number of kids and teens will be at its all-time high for either group, but the number of adults watching is generally at a lowest point for any major name in the business. WWF draws better at the arenas because adults are more set in their ways and don't go to entertainment events like movies, wrestling, sports, etc. with the regularity of kids with their parents or teenagers with their peer groups. But the television viewing, particularly on Monday night, is adult-oriented, and the WWF is losing out with characters with less adult appeal, and also because WCW has the familiar names that the adults grew up with. WCW fell into the same trying too hard to swerve trap on Monday, running a fake Sting heel turn, where prelim wrestler The Cobra was dressed up as Sting, and attacked Lex Luger at just after 9 p.m. Eastern Time. At that point, the WCW rating had hit a 4.2 and seemed poised for its first opposed 4.0 total rating after breaking the 4.0 barrier the previous 2 weeks without wrestling opposition, the September 2nd rating of 4.3 being Nitro's most impressive mark to date since the second hour went against the first hour of the Cowboys-Bears Monday night game that drew a whopping 19.5 rating. However one wishes to analyze what happened next or ignore the tale the rating tells is up to them, but the 4.2 fell to a 3.2 over a 15-minute period. While WWF showed decent growth during that quarter, 2.1 to 2.5, 60% at minimum, and probably more of the 700,000 plus homes that turned off Nitro during a 15-minute period simply turned off wrestling at that point. Whether the masses saw it was a fake Sting, or the Sting turn, which dominated the remainder of the show following in the footsteps of the giant turn, was one hotshot too many, or nobody wanted to see Public Enemy vs. Mang and Barbarian or 1 minute of Rey Mysterio Jr., which were the matches taking place during that quarter, or whatever. It was a colossal ratings drop on a night when almost all the news for WCW was positive. The announcers played the Sting angle huge as if Sting had turned heel and joined the NWO, and actually did a tremendous job of getting it over as a stunning angle. The angle was made more believable because they used a tape of Sting's voice. Steve Borden himself wasn't in Columbus, Georgia that night, talking with Ted DiBiase about whether he could trust him as Luger came out. Luger was in the middle of a match against Rick Steiner when Nick Patrick called Luger to the parking lot saying something involving Sting was going on outside the ring. It was all teased a few minutes earlier with an interview where Sting no-showed the interview as Luger and the Horsemen were there to talk about the War Games match, and the focal point of the interview, rather than the pay-per-view main event, was on where Sting was. Luger came out and the fake Sting jumped him and punted him around. Surprisingly, the show went off the air leaving the fans with no hints that it wasn't actually Sting that turned, basically so that the WCW executives could read internet posts all week and congratulate themselves on being con men par excellence, getting in the way of the fact that their jobs are to draw television ratings and pay-per-view buys. Bischoff apparently believes that fans going into a pay-per-view not knowing who will appear in the main event will add buys to the mystery element. If you look at the history of wrestling and the biggest houses and pay-per-view buy rates in history, there is no evidence in the past of this being the case, and there have been plenty of mystery partner angles done over the years. Of course, the business is constantly changing, and the Hulk Hogan turn, which in many ways turned the company and Bischoff babyface to smart fans because of the surprise element, has now been followed up with basically the same angle with the Giant, done when Davey Boy Smith fell through, and a fake swerve with Sting. However, the Bash at the Beach buy rate would have almost certainly been higher than the 0.7 it turned out to be had the Hogan angle been done 1 week before the show on television and the company had the benefit of Hogan's drawing power and a week of hyping the match for the pay-per-view show, even if the drama at the end of the show itself wouldn't have been nearly as strong, and most importantly, they wouldn't be able to get off on causing a ton of speculation on newsletters, hotlines, and internet, all of which combined proved this weekend to have no effect on television ratings. WCW can go on one of several directions on the pay-per-view show, with the most dramatic being that the fake Sting will be on Hogan and Hall and Nash's team at War Games and with either Steve McMichael or Chris Benoit, and given the talent in the ring and the fact this isn't a match that has been practiced to death, this wouldn't be the night to use McMichael in that role, joining the Flair-Anderson-Luger team. Late in the match, the real Sting can show up and either protest his innocence with nobody believing him or save the day, or the real Sting could be put in the NWO corner and turn on him saying it was his own undercover plan, thus not revealing that it wasn't Steve Borden in the angle. Or they actually could turn him, although that seems to be the least likely of all potential scenarios. All of this will cause a ton of speculation and curiosity over the week, but as Bash at the Beach showed, that has minimal effect on buy rate. WWF learned that lesson the hard way this week, that all the speculation in the world didn't mean squat in the ratings. On Friday night's Raw Championship Friday, a much ballyhooed special headlined by a Shawn Michaels vs. Goldust match on USA Network, Jim Ross said he had the biggest news story of his 20-year career and would reveal it on the hotline. However, instead of doing so, he revealed later in the show that Razor Ramon and Diesel were negotiating to return to the WWF. He said he'd have more details on the hotline and that there would be more information over the weekend on Mania, Action Zone, and Raw. On the hotline, which no doubt did near-record business, Ross basically said negotiations were taking place and he got this information from his best source. Despite hype to the contrary, there were no updates on either Mania or Action Zone, as both shows are taped the previous Tuesday and Vince McMahon didn't even come up with this angle until Thursday, at which point very few in Titan were clued in on what was going on and most in the company were stunned by Ross' announcement on the show. On the Monday afternoon, McMahon sent a post online in continuation of this angle saying that Ross would be forced to apologize for the statements, doing the swerve that they were dropping the angle since most people by this point knew Hall and Nash weren't going back. However, on Raw, Ross said he apologized because his comments upset delicate negotiations with Ramon, but that he was standing by his story and that negotiations with Diesel were going strong. He continued to promise before every commercial break to have more on the story at the end of the show as a way to keep viewers. Even with that, there was a minimal change in ratings once the show got going, and hit the angle hard again at the end of the show. Kevin Nash and Scott Hall knew nothing of this angle, finding out amidst a ton of commotion within wrestling while appearing on Friday night at the WCW house show in Shreveport. There is no loophole in the respective contracts which have more than 2 years left, nor have there been any talks of them rejoining the WWF. Because of all the speculation, particularly online and on hotlines that Friday's announcement caused, the WWF confused that with having done a successful angle. However, the weekend ratings for Mania and Action Zone, 1.2 and 1.7 respectively, were about what they usually get, while the Raw 2.4 was actually lower than its average. The statement was basically designed as a hotshot angle to reverse the trend which has seen WCW dominate the ratings since it switched to the 2-hour format in late May. In particular, History over the years has shown that WWF Raw numbers coming back from the 2-week Monday gap after the US Open usually take a few weeks to get back to normal, and this was seen as a way to pique curiosity and get the numbers back on track immediately. There was little more to the idea than that, although there is a plan, which may or may not be implemented because numerous people in Titan and most in wrestling think it would be a huge mistake to pay off the angle by using Rick Bogner, War's Big Titan, as the bad guy Razor Ramon and Glenn Jacobs, formerly Isaac Yankem, as Big Daddy Cool Diesel. Putting new actors in established roles is commonplace in soap operas, and has been done without fans reacting negatively in pro wrestling, with characters such as Doink the Clown in the WWF after Matt Osborne was fired, or with occasional masked wrestlers in Mexico and the United States after disputes with promoters. But it's never been done in modern times with unmasked distinctive wrestling stars of such high profile. The general belief is this plan, if implemented, will backfire greatly, even though the belief is that Bogner actually can do Razor Ramon better than Scott Hall, since he did a great job with the gimmick on an ECW show in Allentown, Pennsylvania, as Slice and Dice Ramirez. There's even talk that if fans reject the characters that Titan can always turn them heel, thus the boos will be the reaction they want to get from the fans. Of course, there are numerous different kinds of heat and different types of boos, and not all booing heat for a heel is the kind of heat that is a positive. The other potential endings to this angle, which may be drawn out as long as the company gets feedback on it, which could be a mistake because it comes off to most as among the sleaziest angles in years, and whatever interest it's created among insiders and hardcores didn't translate to the masses, would be to simply put the heat on Jim Ross at the end, saying his source was wrong, or saying that, as often happens in high-level negotiations, that the negotiations fell through. WCW really can't react publicly to deny the story because of the lawsuit, because by reacting and saying that Razor Ramon and Diesel, since the names Kevin Nash and Scott Hall have never been used, or even not using those names, and talking about the wrestlers Titan is referring to being under contract and not leaving, would play into WWF's hands in the lawsuit, as it could be construed as an admission they were using Nash and Hall as Diesel and Ramon without using those names publicly. Despite being the main focus of hype on syndication and on cable for 2 weeks, to the extent that the September 22nd pay-per-view show has been downplayed, and ads bought throughout WCW Nitro 4 days earlier, the WWF Championship Friday show with Michaels vs. Goldust wound up doing a 1.8 rating and 3.1 share. That alone quells virtually any chance that there was any to begin with, and my guess is that there wasn't, of Raw moving to Friday nights. New Japan Pro Wrestling officially announced this past week that it would not be holding a Tokyo Dome card in October. The reason given publicly for the show being cancelled was that the October 6th date would be unavailable, as the Nippon Ham Fighters, one of the two baseball teams that play its home games at the Dome, the other being the Yomiuri Giants, either needed the date as a make-up for a rain out earlier in the season or for a potential playoff game. I'm not exactly sure which. The Dome show had never officially been announced but had been in the semi-planning stages for months, and the Tokyo magazine that does ticket listings for events in the October magazine did have New Japan at the Tokyo Dome listed. New Japan had run 3 house shows at the Dome over the past year, off of which sold out, and it's estimated that the combined revenue of the 3 events between ticket sales and souvenirs was well over $20 million, so a cancellation of an event of this magnitude is basically equivalent to the WWF scheduling a second WrestleMania during the year and then canceling it, since the traditional January 4th Dome show is the Japanese equivalent to WrestleMania. There were multiple reasons New Japan decided against holding the show. The New Japan Antonio Inoki plan for the main event was a singles match with Inoki versus Hoist Gracie, something that had largely been a secret publicly. There had been talks going back and forth with New Japan and Horian Gracie, probably for some time, as at least 2 months ago martial arts magazines had quoted Horian as saying that Hoist was planning on fighting in Japan in October. At that time, most of the speculation was it would be on a K1 show or with a shoot-style promotion, and none of the magazines were speculating on it being a New Japan show. The story we've been told is that the Gracies were asking $1 million for the match, which would be the highest figure anyone would have ever been paid for doing a match on a pro wrestling card, with the exception of Muhammad Ali in the 1976 match with Antonio Inoki. According to claims in a lawsuit by Jim Hellwig against Titan Sports, at one point Vince McMahon had agreed to pay Hellwig $1 million per pay-per-view event. Although their relationship fell apart before the first show, Hellwig was supposedly going to get that figure. Whether Hellwig's claim was legitimate or not, and he did earn $550,000 for his 1991 WrestleMania match against Randy Savage, isn't clear, because WWF attorney Jerry McDevitt dismissed most of Hellwig's claims in that and his current lawsuit as being fiction. It is believed Hulk Hogan's highest payoff in his WCW contract, calling for 25% of the company pay-per-view revenue, would fall slightly more than $600,000 for his biggest matches against Ric Flair and Vader, and that he earned in the range of $750,000 for his 1987 WrestleMania match against Andre the Giant, which was the biggest show in American wrestling history. While New Japan had never paid anyone except Ali, who was obviously during his time tons more of a big name than Gracie is today, that type of money. Apparently they agreed to the price, figuring the market value of such a match in Japan. While nobody would say so publicly, it is believed negotiations fell apart because Inoki wanted to win the match, and as it was explained, Gracie would rather die than throw a match, and as with the Ali match, New Japan wasn't going to pay that kind of money for a match and not have their representative get his hand up. There were other problems, such as being unable to get a prime-time slot on TV Asahi for the show if it didn't take place before October 10th, the date the slot was cleared, and the inability to book the Dome before that time. In addition, without the Gracie match, New Japan questioned whether it had anything that could sell 50,000 tickets with only a few weeks of hype. The front office of New Japan, which included Booker Riki Choshu, reportedly worked itself past exhaustion last year in running the special record-setting show in October and then coming back in January, was also relieved because of how little time left and how much work would need to be done to put together a show of that magnitude. The Ultimate Fighting Championships officially completed the bracketing for its September 20th pay-per-view show called Proving Ground from Augusta, Georgia, late September 6th. The only question mark at press time concerns Russian Absolute winner Igor Vovchanchyn, as his being allowed in the country is currently being held up in red tape when it comes to his getting a proper working visa. While it is possible he'll be in this tournament, they are going under the assumption he won't be and that he'll probably be brought in for the February 1997 show. If Semaphore Entertainment Group is able to get Vovchanchyn, who won the most recent Russian Absolute, UFC-style tournament into the country, it would create an intriguing first-round matchup against Tank Abbott. As it stands right now, Sam Adkins, 1-1, who is a 260-pound ex-boxer with some wrestling background who was destroyed by Don Fry in February's UFC 8 in Bayamon, Puerto Rico, is scheduled to be executed by Abbott in the first round. The bracketing consists of Mark Coleman versus Julian Sanchez, a kickboxer from Houston billed at 290 pounds, Brian Johnston, UFC 10, 1-1 record, versus Rezan Nassari, Abbott versus Adkins and Jerry Bolander, UFC 8, 1-1 record, Ken Shamrock protege from the Lion's Den, versus Fabio Gurgel, world champion in the 200-pound weight class in the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Championships in February in Rio de Janeiro. The latter pairing was put together to satisfy fans who complained about the repetitive tackle and punch-style matches with no working for the submissions that were the key finishing maneuvers in the early UFCs, and put two skilled submission fighters against one another in a Lion's Den versus BJJ match, which would lead to a second-round matchup with Abbott versus a submission specialist, the last of which, versus Oleg Toktarov, is generally considered one of the two most exciting fights in UFC history. Nassari, billed at 198 pounds, is from Iran and won the World Championships in Greco-Roman wrestling in 1986, so he's got the grappling background, and is also one of the top-rated Wing Chun fighters, a striking martial art, and teaches his own martial art called Realistic Combat Arts. As history has shown, anyone with that level of wrestling skill, even without a decade of training in striking arts, is someone to be reckoned with in UFC competition. One would suspect by the draw that the semifinals would be Coleman, who rumors say is going to come into this tournament at 260 pounds. He was 245 when he won UFC 10, facing Nassari, who would be a far more highly skilled wrestler than Don Fry but unproven in this type of competition. And Abbott most likely facing Gurgel. Abbott has been training for power as evidenced by his 600-pound bench press on television, and is currently well in excess of 300 pounds on a 5'10" frame and is expected to come in around 295 pounds, 45 pounds heavier than in Ultimate. Other competitors believe carrying that kind of weight on his frame would create a stamina problem, but Abbott is a powerhouse with a strong punch, and while far from a world-class wrestler, as the Severn match showed, he is a much better wrestler than most give him credit for. Gurgel is a legitimate BJJ top-class fighter with Vale Tudo experience, but will probably give away 80 to 90 pounds against a hard hitter with balance. Alternate matches are Roberto Traven, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, 215 pounds, versus David Berry, Kung Fu, 216 pounds, and Scott Ferozzo, 335-pound pit fighter who lost to Bolander in UFC 13, versus Sam Fulton, a kickboxer from nearby Athens, Alabama. 5 names are confirmed for the Ultimate on December 20th in Birmingham, Alabama: Ken Shamrock, Dan Severn, Fry, Coleman, and Abbott. Hype has it that Shamrock will be training the hardest he ever has to atone for his performance in the Severn match and answer all the questions about him as he attempts to use this event to allow him to finalize his rep and retire as a martial arts legend. They are making a slight rule change in that they are developing a soft side shoe that would be legal to kick with. UFC rules have been a fighter can go barefoot and kick, or wear a shoe, giving them better stability for wrestling, but then kicking would be illegal. However, while wearing the kicking shoe, one can't kick a man when he's down. Boss Rutten retained his King of Pancrase Championship to headline Pancrase's 3rd anniversary show on September 7th at Tokyo Bay NK Hall, taped for pay-per-view with a U.S. air date of November 3rd. The show drew a standing room-only crowd of 7,250 fans in the 7,000-seat arena, with the Pancrase matches due to some changes in style, resembling more Muay Thai fighting with some grappling as opposed to an emphasis on submission wrestling. Because of that, most of the results, including the main event, was considered surprises to the hardcore Pancrase fans, and many of the Pancrase wrestlers as well, who largely were expecting a title change due to Funaki's superior wrestling ability to Rutten and thoughts Rutten may not have fully recovered from a serious automobile accident on July 4th. As it was explained to me, the fighters have become so skilled at blocking submission attempts, hence all the time limit draws on recent shows, that the referees were ordering stand-ups and restarts as soon as action got stale on the mat, as the frequent stand-ups increased the chances of punishment and thus clean finishes from strikes as style evolution worked away from submissions. It was described as the next step in the continual evolution of hybrid martial wrestling and wrestling. A similar evolution took place in Brazil, where Vale Tudo matches at one point were dominated by submission fighters, and then as people learned to block submissions, they were dominated by good defensive ground fighters with strong striking and positioning skills. Those changes have meant a difference in the prototypical Pancrase fighter from someone great at submissions and strong standing as well, such as Funaki or Ken Shamrock, or someone with some quickness standing and good balance and wrestling skills like Frank Shamrock or Minoru Suzuki, to the dominance of a powerful striker who is good enough defensively on the ground to cause a stalemate and hence a restart and dominate while standing up, a description that fits Rutten, by far the heaviest hitter in the organization, to a T. The main event saw Rutten win via knockout in 17:05 in what was described as a great match and the best match on the card. There were lots of violent and stiff exchanges on their feet, with Rutten always able to block Funaki's attempts to finish him on the ground once they went down. At one point they called a controversial rope break lost point on Rutten when he used the ropes to stabilize himself rather than to escape from a submission. Funaki was apparently getting destroyed at the end, and was bloodied up from various parts of his face, including a broken nose and eyes that swelled to the point it greatly affected his vision from Rutten's palm thrusts and kicks, and was knocked down several times. Several times Funaki was knocked down and the crowd believed he wasn't going to get up, and finally Rutten caught him with a knee to the chin and put him out. After the match, Funaki gave a speech where he said the match was like a dream to him and it was his best match since turning pro, since he felt he did his best even though he took tremendous punishment and lost, and doing one's best is what's important, and got a huge reaction from the crowd. Funaki had up to this point been dead set against doing UFC because he believed in fighting for art and not in fighting being brutal, but at the company's 3rd anniversary party the day after the show, he said he wanted to do a UFC. Masami Ozaki, Pancrase president, went to the US after the show to both set up doing a live house show in 1997 in the United States, attend the next UFC show, and negotiate with Semaphore Entertainment Group about getting Funaki into a UFC next year. Semaphore Entertainment Group has mentioned Rutten, Yoshiki Takahashi and Frank Shamrock as people they were interested in using for UFC, with the main problem being that since Pancrase runs monthly, it's hard to clear the schedule. Semaphore Entertainment Group had been interested in using one of those names on this current pay-per-view, but with Pancrase having such an important show 2 weeks earlier, it made doing so impossible. The description to me is that the live crowd was totally into everything but in a studious rather than a boisterous way. However, there was a fight in the crowd during intermission, which is something that is exceedingly rare in Japan, which shows cultures coming closer together. The semifinal, where Guy Mesger retained his number 2 ranking, beating Ryushi Yanagisawa via a 3-0 unanimous decision after the 20-minute time limit expired, was said to have been the worst match on the show. Yanagisawa didn't do much in the match and the crowd sensed it and was booing him a lot. Yanagisawa also received a yellow card for stalling. Without question, the biggest upset on the show saw number 1 ranked contender Frank Shamrock via knockout to Rokiyuki Kondo in 12:43 with a kick to the head. It was an interesting match to watch since Shamrock was clearly better on the ground, but on their feet, Kondo was the stronger fighter. Apparently Shamrock came out strong and dominated early. When Shamrock had Kondo mounted and went to throwing body blows, Kondo was able to reverse him several times. As the match wore on, It appeared Shamrock got both tired and frustrated with his inability to do anything with Kondo, and at one point got a yellow card for throwing a punch to the face. Kondo finally scored a flurry with 2 palm blows and a kick to the face, with Shamrock falling through the ropes and injuring himself on impact with the floor and being unable to continue for the knockout win. Kondo, who debuted on the January 28 card, now has an 8-0-1 record in Pancrase with wins over both Shamrock and Suzuki and a draw against Asami Shibuya. While this has not been officially announced, it was strongly hinted at the party the next day that Ruten's next title defense, which will be on December 15 at Tokyo Sumo Hall, will be against Kondo. Jason DeLucia continued the losing streak of Minoru Suzuki with a knockout with a palm thrust in 4:58. Suzuki got to his feet from the blow, but the referee stopped the match anyway because the ref believed his eyes were glassy. At the party the next day, it was strongly hinted that the promotion wanted Suzuki to take several months off to heal up his injuries from the past several months. The other Lions Den fighter, Vernon White, had a brutal match against Yoshiki Takahashi, which saw Takahashi get knocked down several times before he finally ate a kick and was KO'd at 19:43 and did a stretcher job. Paul Alperstein's American Wrestling Federation is scheduled to hold a press conference on September 12 at the All-Star Cafe in New York to hype its new fall season broadcasts, which begin nationally on September 21. The group has purchased television time in most of the major markets, including 45 of the top 50 markets, which would make it have more syndication clearances than any group in the United States except WCW, since WWF is losing syndication in most of the major markets due to deciding against paying for television time. It's an incredible load to carry, as evidenced by the fact WWF walked away from those costs, in excess of $2 million per year, with a recognizable product, advertisers. Industry insiders estimate that the AWF will be spending in the $4 million range per year for compensation, including in excess of $300,000 per year in both the New York and Los Angeles markets, a figure there would be no way to recoup on advertising revenue. Those in the wrestling syndication business consider the AWF's entree as a negative for the industry overall because with one company willing to pay big money in nearly every major market for clearances, it makes stronger the belief among those with syndicated stations that pro wrestling should exist only as paid programming and thus make it harder, no matter what the ratings pro wrestling delivers, to get shows on broadcast television without paying for the time. AWF held its first television tapings for the new season for its show entitled AWF Warriors of Wrestling on August 24 in Tampa, and plans on using the Road Warriors, Sergeant Slaughter, Tito Santana, Bob Orton, Greg Valentine, Tommy Rich, Missy Hyatt, Tom Zenk, Blacktop Bully and Charlie Norris as its top stars. The television matches will differ from traditional U.S. style in that they'll use the European and boxing round system. The line between work and shoot continues to be blurred with the formation of yet another new promotion in Japan known as the U-Japan, which will have its first show on November 17 at the Ariake Coliseum, 11,000 seats, in the Tokyo Bay area. The group will be run by Daisan Promotions, a collection of former New Japan House show promoters, although this group is not related to New Japan Pro Wrestling. This group is basically attempting to take the UFC concept live into Japan, using fighters familiar to Japanese fans either through pro wrestling or UFC videotapes, which are more popular as far as the rental market goes in Japan than traditional pro wrestling videotapes, as well as the octagon cage setup and referee John McCarthy. However, there is one huge difference between this promotion and UFC in that this will either be a combination of worked and shoot matches, or shoot-style matches with predetermined finishes according to information we've received. While we don't have a lot of details, we do know that at least 3 U.S. promotions, one of which is the WWF, have been contacted by this group, which has connections in San Francisco, so there is a good chance the event will be videotaped for the U.S. market, and we're told that their fighters or wrestlers could be protected on the finishes if need be. The idea for the main event on the first show was Kimo vs. Vader, and the WWF was approached within the past few weeks about this match. However, there is 0% chance of that match taking place because November 17 is the same day as the WWF Survivor Series. They also have a rematch scheduled from UFC with Koji Kiao vs. Mark Hall, and UFC competitors Dan Severn, Don Fry, Gary Goodridge, and Paul Verlins are all scheduled on the first show. We had incorrectly listed this show last week as being a Satoru Sayama's Valley Tudo promotion. What makes Severn and Fry's name on the show interesting is that the show will take place 5 weeks before Ultimate, which both are scheduled in. I suspect Severn and Fry will both be protected for that reason. Fry has expressed interest in doing pro wrestling in Japan and forming a tag team with Severn, as either an injury or a loss on a show like that so close to the Ultimate could result in Semaphore Entertainment Group pulling them from the show or them having to withdraw from the show, and in the case of Severn, who has to be considered a favorite in Ultimate, you are talking about putting a $150,000 potential winning payoff at risk. Because Kimo received this booking, he pulled out of his scheduled pro wrestling date on September 11th for UWFI at the Tokyo Jingu Baseball Stadium against Yoji Anjo, which was actually billed as the semifinal to the Nobuhiko Tada vs. Genichiro Tenryu match. In reality, the real number 2 draw on the show, and arguably even the biggest drawing match on the show, is the end of All Japan's isolationist policy when it comes to interpromotional matches, and the Toshiaki Kawada vs. Yoshihiro Takayama, UWFI, match. The word we've been given is that approximately 40,000 tickets have been sold in a 46,000-seat stadium, about 20,000 of which were sold over the past week after the announcement of Kawada working the show. David Beneteau of UFC, making his pro wrestling debut, will replace Kimo in the match. Results. August 26, Chesterfield, Virginia. Southern Wrestling Alliance, RC Lovin v. Kevin Dalton, Miss Linda v. Brenda Lee, Shane v. Larry the Intimidator, Hot Squad and LL Cool v. Houston Brothers and Unknown, Nighthawk v. Wrangler David Jericho, David Cash v. Rick Savage, Roger Anderson, Roger Hill v. Doherty Reed, Jeff Collett v. Vladimir Koloff DQ Wahoo McDaniel and Johnny Ringo v. Bunkhouse Boys. August 31st, Naples, Florida, Indiana, 400, David Isley v. Midnight Rider, Overlords v. Frankie Capone and Samurai Warrior, Malia Hasaka v. Blaze, Sam Houston and Sushi Man Ricky v. L.A. Stevens and Thunderfoot I. Isley, Vladimir Koloff v. Rockin' Randy, Randy 1 Battle Royal. August 31st, Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, All-Star Championship Wrestling, Chris Stevenson v. Q Ball Carmichael, Doink v. Julio Sanchez, Poison Ivy NC Corporal Punishment, The Ref v. Punishment, Big Slam Vader v. Jimmy Cicero, Stevenson 1 Battle Royal. August 31st, Evansville, Indiana, Hook and Shoot Promotions, 363 Sellout, Wrestling Rules, Eric Schelling Hargreave d. Tim Petersheim, Eric Klieg b. Jeff Osborne, Phil Stoffolino b. Cade Swallows, Jay Oppenheim b. Russ Paxson, Ian Haynes b. Tony Crawley, Pancrase Rules, Sean Brockmole d. Butch Smith, Stoffolino d. Gary Griffith, Tam Sharon b. J.R. Douglas, Pancradion HWT Title Tournament, Austin Long b. Nick Tesla, Mark Nelson b. Mike Kennedy, Long b. Nelson to win tournament. September 2nd, Chichibu, All Japan, 2050 Sellout, Satoru Asako b. Yoshinobu Kanemaru, Tsuyoshi Kikuchi b. Kentaro Shiga, Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momoto b. Mighty Inoue and Haruka Eigen and Masa Fuchi, Giant Kimala 2 and Jun Izumida b. Tamon Honda and Masao Inoue, The Patriot and Gary Albright b. Stan Hansen and Johnny Smith, Mitsuharu Misawa and Jun Akiyama b. Takawa Mori and Kena Kobashi, Akira Tao and Toshiaki Kawada and Yoshinari Ogawa b. Dan Crawford and Johnny Ace and Steve Williams. September 30 Waki, All Japan, 2200 Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momoto b. Mighty Inoue and Haruka Eigen and Masa Fuchi, Kentaro Shiga b. Yoshinobu Kanemaru, Giant Kimala 2 and Jun Izumida b. Tsuyoshi Kikuchi and Yoshinari Ogawa, Gary Albright b. Masao Inoue, The Patriot and Kena Kobashi b. Tamon Honda and Akira Tao, Steve Williams and Johnny Ace b. Takawa Mori and Toshiaki Kawada, Mitsuharu Misawa and Jun Akiyama and Satoru Asako b. Stan Hansen and Dan Crawford and Johnny Smith. September 3rd Kasu, All Japan Women, Momoe Nakanishi b. Sekiguchi, Nana Takahashi b. Miho Wakezawa, Kumiko Maekawa and Yuka Shina and Saya Endo b. Ritamata and Yumi Fukawa and Genki Misae, Manami Toyota b. Yoshiko Tamura, Takako Inoue and Mima Shimoda b. Mariko Yoshida and Kaoru Ito, Yumiko Hata and Atsuko Mita and Reggie Bennett b. Toshio Yamada and Kyoko Inoue and Tomoko Watanabe. September 4th Gainesville, Georgia WCW Saturday Night Tapings, 1,800 Sellout Heavily Papered, Diamond Dallas Page b. Jim Duggan DQ, Bobby Walker b. Arnold Anderson DQ, BK Wall Street b. Randy Savage DQ, Lex Luger b. Ron Studd, Rick Steiner b. Kurosawa, Chris Jericho b. Billy Kidman, Bobby Eaton b. David Taylor, Ice Train b. Gambler, Nasty Boys b. High Voltage. September 4th Tokyo, All Japan Women, 3,260 Free Show, Yachio Kawamoto b. Miho Wakezawa, Yuka Shina and Sai Endo d. Momoe Nakanishi and Nana Takahashi, Manami Toyota and Mima Shimoda and Yoshiko Tamura b. Toshio Yamada and Atsuko Mita and Genki Misae, Kaoru Ito b. Mariko Yoshida, Kyoko Inoue and Takako Inoue b. Yumiko Hata and Tomoko Watanabe. September 5th Tokyo Budokan Hall, All Japan, 14,500 Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momoto b. Haruka Eigen and Mighty Inoue, The Patriot and Johnny Smith b Kantaro Shiga and Jumbo Tsuruta, Giant Kimalatu and Dan Crawford and Jun Izumida b Giant Baba and Masao Inoue and Satoru Asako. Gary Albright b Takao Mori, Akira Tao and Yoshinari Ogawa and Tamon Honda b Toshiaki Kawada and Masa Fuchi and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi. Triple Crown Kena Kobashi b Stan Hansen, PWF in international tag titles. Steve Williams and Johnny Ace b Mitsuharu Misawa and Jun Akiyama to win titles. September 5 Matsudo, All Japan Women. Nana Takahashi b Sekiguchi Yoshiko Tamura b Momoe Nakanishi. Ri Tamada and Yumi Fukawa b Yuka Shina and Genki Misae. Kyoko Inoue and Takako Inoue and Reggie Bennett b Etsuko Mita and Mima Shimoda and Tomoko Watanabe. Toshio Yamada b Kaoru Ito. Manami Toyota and Mariko Yoshida b Kumiko Makawa and Yumiko Hata. September 5 Bakersfield, California. Slammers, Samoan Kid b Dynamite Kid. Hombre de Oro b El Toro Bravo. Bruce Bodine b Vern Langdon. Bravo b Samoan Kid. Jeff Lindbergh b Tyrone Little. September 6 Shreveport, Louisiana. WCW, 6,810 with 6,107 paid. Scott Norton b Ice Train. Diamond Dallas Page b Joe Gomez. Hugh Morris b John Tena. WCW Tag Titles. Harlem Heat b Terry Taylor and Rick Steiner. Lex Luger b Ric Flair. Scott Hall and Kevin Nash and the Giant b Big Bubba and Morrison Barbarian. September 6 Chalmette, Louisiana. CWF, Tommy Martinelli b Blonde Bomber. Kevin Northcutt b Paul Edwards. Gator b Lord Humongous DQ Crazy Joe and TJ Sullivan and C Ripper and Saxon. Doink the Clown b Joe Kane. Tommy Rich b Doug Gilbert DQ. September 7 Tokyo Bay NK Hall. Pancrase 7,250 sellout. Satoshi Hasegawa b Kim John Wang. Takafumi Ito b Asami Shibuya. Katsumi Inagaki b Keiichiro Yamamiya. Manabu Yamada b Kyuma Kunyoku. Yuki Kondo b Frank Shamrock. Vernon White b Yoshiki Takahashi. Jason DeLucia b Minoru Suzuki. Guy Mesger b Ryushi Yanagisawa. King of Pancrase title. Boss Ruden b Masakatsu Funaki. September 7 Dallas Reunion Arena, WWF 7,326, Bushwhackers b Justin Bradshaw and Zeb 1/4 of 1 star. Farouk b Bob Holly 3/4 of a star. Jose Lothario b Jim Cornette Dud. Stalker. Barry Windham b Jerry Lawler 1/2 of 1 star. WWF Tag Titles, Smoking Guns Kirk Grimm Twins 1 1/4 stars, Sid b Vader 3/4 of a star. WWF title, Shawn Michaels b Goldust 2 1/4 stars. September 7 Springfield, Tennessee. USWA, Vampire Warrior, David Heath b Flash Flanagan, Frank Morrell b Tony Falk Street Fight. Wolfie D b Jamie Dundee. Miss Texas b Luna Vachon. Texas Deathmatch, Brian Christopher and Jesse James, Armstrong and D and Morrell b Vampire and Mike Samples and Falk and Jamie Dundee. September 7 Skull All Japan Women, Momoe Nakanishi and Yasho Kawamoto b Miho Wakezawa and Sekiguchi. Nana Takahashi d Yumi Fukawa. Toshio Yamada and Yuka Shinobi Genki Misae and Mima Shimoda. Kaoru Ito and Mariko Yoshida and Manami Toyota b Kumiko Makawa and Ri Tamada and Yoshiko Tamura. Etsuko Mita b Takako Inoue. Reggie Bennett and Yumiko Hata b Kyoko Inoue and Tomoko Watanabe. September 7 Yardville, New Jersey, NWA. 300. Inferno Kid b Bud Precious. Ralph Soto Gino Caruso. Crazy Ivan b Don Matoya. Lost Boys b Jack Ryder and Iron Sheik b Rick Ratchet DQ. Bad Attitude b Downward Spiral. Reckless Youth b Derek Domino to win NA title. September 7 Chatham, ONT NWA. 155. Jimmy V b Mike Legacy. Tommy Knox b Larry Destiny. Geza Coleman Jr. 1 Battle Royal. Bobby Clancy b Danger Boy. Destiny and Kodiak b Tim and Tommy Knox. Barbed Wire Baseball Bat Match. Tex Monroe NC Sean Brown. Doink b Lumberjack, NWA title, Dan Severn b Coleman Jr. September 7 West Newton, Pennsylvania. Pro Wrestling Express 742, Extreme Militia b Giant Hillbillies. M. Quackenbush b JB Destiny. Brian Anthony Curti Ranchula. Danny Gregory b Lord Zoltan. Bubba the Bulldog b Bonecrusher DQ, Black Cat and Paul Atlas b Lou Marconi and Stevie Richards. September 7 Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canadian Wrestling Federation. Power Rangers b Bobby Collins and Chad Ripley. Todd Bullitt b Caveman Broda. Bobby J b Easy Rider. Robbie Hoist b Leatherface. Rick Patterson. Bugsy Slegliano b JT Atlas. Spice Richards b Vance, Nevada. September 7 Houma, Louisiana. Mid-South Wrestling. Mr. Wrestling 3 Dale Wolf B Shogun Warrior, Twister B TJ Sullivan DQ, Bronco Bob B Crazy Joe DQ, Joe Kane B Doink the Clown, Frankie Rhodes and Kevin Northcutt B Ripper and Saxon, Tommy Rich B Doug Gilbert DQ. September 7th Hayward, California, All Pro Wrestling, 65 Sellout, Rick Turner B J Smooth, Joe Applebaumer B Chicano Flame, Aaron O'Grady B Bill Calhoun, Robert Thompson B Frank Dalton, Michael Modest and Steve Rizzono B Chris Cole and Donovan Morgan. September 7th Greenville, South Carolina, Southern Championship Wrestling 70, J.W. Steele B Russian Assassin, Johnny Dollar, Rick Nelson and Joe Harley B Freddie Rich and Michael Williams, S.W. Steel Kerr Max Miles, The Freedom Fighter B J.J. Justice, Cruiser Lewis B SWAT, Ricky Regal and Mickey Free B Desperado and Jake Mulligan. September 7th Spring Place, Georgia, World Christian Federation, Chuck Colt B Southern Rebel, Randy Watkins B Billy Montana, Jimmy Sharp B Outpatient, County Cruz and Randy Rotten B Keith Karloff and Red Scorpion, Johnny Quaz and Joey Funk B Scotty James and Watkins. September 8th Oklahoma City, WWF, 3405, Jose Lothario B Jim Cornette, Bushwhackers B Zeb and Justin Bradshaw, Farouk B Bob Holly, WWF Tag Titles, Smoking Guns B Grim Twins, Stalker B Jerry Lawler, Sid DDQ Vader, WWF title, Shawn Michaels B Goldust. September 8th Tokyo Korakuen Hall, JWP, 2000 Sellout Korakuen Hall Tag Titles, Tomoko Kuzumi and Tomoko Miyaguchi B Yuki Miyazaki and Rieko Amano, Mayumi Ozaki and Amano and Sugar Sato B Cutie Suzuki and Commander Borishoi and Miyazaki, Devil Masami and Kanako Matoya B Miyaguchi and Fuseo Naochi, Jaguar Yokota B Hiromi Yagi, Dynamite Kansai and Kuzumi B Hikari Fukuoka and Candy Akutsu. September 8th Miyagi, All Japan Women, Nana Takahashi B Miho Wakezawa, Yumi Fukawa and Ri Tamada B Shaparita Asari and Yuka Shina, Mima Shimoda B Genki Misae, Mariko Yoshida and Kaoru Ito B Kumiko Makawa and Yoshiko Tamura, Kyoko Inoue and Takako Inoue and Tomoko Watanabe B Yumiko Hata and Toshio Yamada and Etsuko Mita. September 8th Marrero, Louisiana, CWF, Crazy Joe DDQ TJ Sullivan, Gator B Paul Edwards, Carl Fergie B Tommy Martinelli, Joe Kane B Mr. Wrestling 3, Dale Wolf, Al Savage B Doink the Clown, Kevin Northcutt and Gary Nations B The Ripper and Saxon, Doug Gilbert B Tommy Rich. September 9th Columbus, Georgia, WCW Monday Nitro Tapings 6000, Super Colo B Pat Tanaka 1 1/4 stars, Nasty Boys B Amazing French Canadians, Jacques Rojo and Pierre-Carl Ouellette, 1 1/2 star. Submission match, Scott Norton B Craig Pittman 1/2 of 1 star, Juventud Guerrera B Joe Gomez 1/4 of 1 star, Rick Steiner B Lex Luger Core 1 3/4 stars, WCW Cruiserweight title, Rey Mysterio Jr. B Billy Kidman 2 stars, Meng and Barbarian NC Public Enemy 1 1/4 stars, John Tena B Randy Savage Core Dud. Special thanks to Dan Paris, Tim Knoll, Greg John, Hernan Villarreal, Trent Van Driesen, David Milliken, B. Daniels, Sarah Moore, Jesse Money, Chuck Longerman, Georgianne Macropolis, Sean Brown, Jeff Osborne, Robert Edlhauser, Bob Ryder, Roland Alexander. Japanese Television Rundown. August 11th All Japan. 1. Tsuyoshi Kikuchi won the PWF Junior title from Masa Fuchi. Both guys tried and this match went around 20 minutes, but they've both declined a lot from 3 years ago when they had a hot feud. Fuchi because of age and Kikuchi because he took too much of a beating for too long. They worked the match around spots doing consecutive back suplexes, which was a key spot in probably their most famous singles match. Finish saw Kikuchi do rolling German suplexes on 3 occasions, and finally on the 3rd try, he got the pin which would be Kikuchi's first big singles match pin on Fuchi after a number of tries. However, it came too late and it was terribly anticlimactic although it was a good match. 3 stars. August 18th All Japan. 1. Jumbo Tsuruta and Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momoto beat Mighty Inoue and Masao Inoue and Haruka Eigen in 9:52 when Momoto pinned Masao. Kimura is awful. They built the match around the Eigen spit spot and again he spit at Kimura's mouth. Actually this was better than the usual because of Mighty and Masao Inoue who did some wrestling and the finish itself was decent. 1 1/2 star. 2. Misawa and Akiyama and Honda beat Baba and Izumida and Kimala 2. 2's body was so painted up he looked like a giant mural. There were some awful spots with Baba versus Honda. 2 and Izumida have some double team spots that get over. Honda looked really bad. The match never got going and Akiyama ended up pinning Izumida with the exploder suplex. 1 star 1 quarter. August 25th, All Japan. 1. Albright beat Fuchi with a chinlock submission. Fuchi worked a smart match, mainly doing hit and run stuff. But the match had no heat. 1 star. 2. Misawa and Akiyama and Honda beat Williams and Ace and Smith when Akiyama pinned Smith after a Northern Lights suplex. The crowd was dead for this match as well. The work was on the sloppy side as well. After the match they shot an angle building up Budokan where Williams used a backdrop driver on Akiyama, dropping him on his head, and then the two did the double impact on Misawa and left him laying as well. A nothing match, however. 1 star 1 quarter. EMLL. The September 6th Arena Mexico show was headlined by Rayo de Jalisco and Njpw Sr. and Dos Cars vs. Gran Marcus Jr. and Dr. Wagner Jr. and Apollo Dantes in no doubt a continuation of the Rayo-Marcus feud. We don't have results of the main since it didn't air on the Sunday television, but in the second and third matches from the top on that show, Silver King and Dandy and Mr. Njpw beat Emilio Charles Jr. and Negro Casas and Black Warrior in a 3 1/4 stars match, and Super Estro and Shocker and La Fiera beat Mano Negra and Rey Bucanero and Bestia Salvaje in another good match. The Promel taping on September 6th in Cuautitlán was headlined by a Mexican National Trios title match with Blue Panther and Fuerza Guerrera and El Signo defending against El Brazo and Brazo de Plata and Super Electra, who beat them in a non-title match the week before. Dandy had a hair versus hair match on September 3rd against Chicago Express that one would suspect Dandy won. AAA. AAA has a show booked on October 19th in Phoenix, but we don't have a lineup for it. Conan is planning on running 2 stadium shows in October at the Tijuana Bull Ring. Tentative plan is that the first show will be in mid-October, headlined by Rey Mysterio Jr. vs. Misterioso in a mask versus mask match, Octagon and La Parca vs. Psicosis and Phobia, Leon Negro vs. El Hijo del Enfermero in a mask versus mask match, and Conan is attempting to do the Inoki mixed martial arts gimmick against a karate or taekwondo guy. The second would be around October 30th as a Halloween spectacular using some WCW talent that's already in the Southwest for Havoc and Nitro. Nothing is finalized on that deal, but they are looking at bringing in 2 WCW headliners plus do a triple hair match with Pandilleros vs. Destructors, and a mask match with Halloween vs. Thunderbird, and a singles with Perro Aguayo vs. Psicosis. The next Tijuana is September 13th at the Auditorio with Aguayo, Mascara Sagrada Jr., Destructors and Cibernetico as the Mexico City talent being brought in. The biggest show in company history using wrestlers from WCW, New Japan and War has been moved from November 20th to November 29th in Mexico City. They are building up a feud with Juventud Guerrera vs. Salcero to end up with a mask versus mask match. Salcero is a good flyer but has been working prelim comedy style matches, so he's gotten used to that lazy week offense. Over the weekend, they had a show on September 7th in Chihuahua which drew 3,000 with Conan and Aguayo vs. Killer and Cien Caras, Octagon and Parca and Latin Lover vs. Jerry Estrada and Heavy Metal and Villano 3, Rey Mysterio Jr. and Perro Aguayo Jr. vs. Psicosis and Juventud Guerrera and the Minis, which for a show of that caliber is a weak crowd. Basically the same crew on September 8th in Juarez drew a sellout in an 8,000-seat arena. A second crew worked weekend shots in Monterrey on September 8th. Mascara Sagrada and Mascara Sagrada Jr. and Mascara de Sagrada Jr. vs. Pierroth Jr. and Espectrito I and Halcon Dorado Jr. in Nuevo Laredo on September 9th. Pimpinela Escarlata defending the Mexican light heavyweight title against Latin Lover. The August 30th Juan de la Barrera Gym show in Mexico City drew 4,000. Pierroth Jr. is suspended in the DF for all the wildness during the Janet vs. Meagley hair match on August 16th, including powerbombing Lady Victoria. They held a hearing on September 4th with Wolf Ruvinskis with Conan to try and settle all the problems. It came out amicable after some arguing. The commission came out of it understanding why Conan was doing the wild FMW/ECW style matches, but they still felt it was too radical of an approach. Conan promised that he wouldn't do that style within the DF anymore, and they dropped the threatened $1,500 fine and 1 month's suspension. The commission has made it clear that it's not going to tolerate wildness, as they suspended Pierroth and also put EMLL's Emilio Charles Jr. on probation for doing a fairly common heel spot of putting a babyface's leg into the permanent chairs at Arena Mexico and kicking the chair. The last Northern tour besides the 5,200 crowd on September 1st in Tijuana saw Mexicali on August 31st drew 3,500, San Felipe on September 2nd drew 3,000 and Nogales on September 3rd drew a sellout 2,700. All Japan. The tour ended on September 5 at Budokan Hall with the double headliner as Steve Williams and Johnny Ace captured the PWF and International Tag Team titles, beating Mitsuharu Misawa and Jun Akiyama in the main event, while Kenta Kobashi retained the Triple Crown, pinning Stan Hansen. Apparently Hansen had one last great match left in him, as both matches were said to have been fantastic. The show drew an estimated 14,500 fans, but All Japan still announced it as a sellout 16,300. Apparently, with the bloom off the rose of this promotion, even in its home Tokyo area, due to staleness, they've been announcing Budokan sellouts, but the shows have been big crowds, but they definitely haven't sold out since June, or even before that. All Japan continues to sell out smaller Korakuen Hall every time out, which is no great accomplishment, but they had a string of sellouts at both Korakuen and Budokan that dated back to around 1990, and they are trying to keep it going publicly, even though the reality isn't the case. The show was said to have been great due to the two main events both being super matches. It opened with Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momota over Haruka Eigen and Mighty Inoue, when Kimura pinned Eigen with an abdominal stretch, dropped into a cradle in 10:44, and their typical comedy match built around the Eigen spit spot. The Patriot and Johnny Smith beat Jumbo Tsuruta and Kentaro Shiga in 11:58 when Smith pinned Shiga after a Liger Bomb. It was a pretty good match since it was mostly Smith working with Shiga, and Smith looked really good. Tsuruta was only in briefly, doing his trademark spots. Giant Kimala 2 and Jun Izumida. Ryukaku Izumida has changed his ring first name to Jun actually about 2 weeks back, and Dan Crawford beat Giant Baba and Masao Inoue and Satoru Asako in 14:44 when two pinned Asako with a splash. It was a bad match, with the foreign team breaking up after the match, with Crawford kicking two in the groin. Gary Albright pinned Takao Omori in 6:13 after a dragon suplex. Since Omori was doing the job, he dominated early until Albright cut him off with his big suplexes, which Omori sold huge. The match was okay but too short since the fans weren't into the finish, since it came before they were ready for a finish. Akira Tao and Yoshinari Ogawa and Tomoe Honda beat Toshiaki Kawada and Masa Fuchi and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi in 17:24 when Tao pinned Kikuchi with the Nadawa choke slam. It was real good when Kawada was in with Tao, as they beat the crap out of each other and okay the rest of the way. The crowd takes Honda more as a comedy figure than a serious star. Kawada was super over since he's a focal point right now with his interpromotional match. The Kobashi-Hansen match went 26:07. Hansen came out more serious than usual and didn't play to the crowd as he usually does in his ring entrance. This got the crowd into it, as Hansen being focused on winning the title for one last time. This was said to have been Hansen's best singles match since his match with Kobashi about 3 years ago, which was a strong match of the year finisher, and this was described as being in the 4.5 stars range. A big spot came about 9 minutes when Hansen powerbombed Kobashi on the floor and pounded on him for several minutes. Kobashi finally made the comeback and smashed Hansen's lariat arm into the ring post. Hansen was selling the arm big. At this point the crowd was almost 50-50, as they were into Hansen as the elder statesman in what people figured was his last great match, and Kobashi is over, having just won the title after the long quest. At the 19-minute mark they went back and forth with near falls. There was one super near fall when Hansen hit a lariat and Kobashi barely kicked out when everyone in the arena thought it was the finish. Kobashi came back with 2 lariats and got the pin. Hansen attacked Kobashi after the match and the fans booed Hansen and threw the PWF belt into the crowd. The finale saw Williams and Ace win the tag titles when Ace pinned Akiyama in 28:47 with his Cobra back suplex. This match had super pacing and was said to have been even better than the Hansen-Kobashi match, but a shade below the tag match these two teams had earlier this year, which may have been the best match of the year. Ace and Akiyama were crossing up each other's spots. Williams got a bloody lip at one point. Williams finally hit the backdrop driver on Misawa, so Akiyama had to wrestle several minutes alone. Akiyama later gave Williams a Northern Lights suplex on the floor, knocking him out of action. Williams and Misawa both recovered, and later Williams gave Misawa another backdrop driver, which he sold like he was dead. Ace got one near fall after another on Akiyama before finally putting him away. Even though Kobashi is the champ, Misawa is still viewed by the fans as the top wrestler in the promotion, and he got the best reactions. They did angles to set up both main events, which is a change of pace since All Japan has almost never done angles, which shows they know they've got to do more than they've been able to get away with in the past, because they were able to sell out based on simply great work on top. Nothing has been announced for the next tour from September 28th to October 18th, with major shows on October 12th in Nagoya, and the final night at Budokan Hall. After the show, Baba said the deal with Kawada at this point is still a one-shot deal. There are rumors that Misawa and Nobuhiko Takada have already met to work out their program for next year. When asked if it would be possible for the UWFI wrestlers to work All Japan shows, He said no deal has been made but he'd be receptive toward one, but said he wouldn't work with any other groups and said that he wasn't going to attend the Jingu Stadium show. September 1st TV show did a 2.8 rating. The tag title change aired on television on September 8th, and the Kobashi Hansen airs on September 15th, which should be a welcome relief since the television during August, which ironically drew big ratings, was terrible. New Japan. Lots of changes in the current tour due to injuries. This past week Great Sasuke, Scott Steiner and Scott Hall all canceled the upcoming tour. Sasuke of course canceled due to his fractured skull and Steiner due to his hip injury, which must be serious since they aren't expecting him for the tag team tournament in October either. The deal with Hall apparently is that his WCW contract differed from the standard in that he can make his own New Japan deal, and this tour was something that WCW booked him on and I guess they didn't have the right to. Marcus Bagwell will take his place and face Shinya Hashimoto in the first round of the WCW/New Japan Single Elimination Tournament. Hulk also canceled the tour about a month back because he underwent knee surgery, so the big deal originally on this tour of doing several Steiners vs. Road Warriors matches has totally fallen apart. Because of all the injuries, the late September run, traditionally the company's second biggest house show run of the year after August, is really lackluster. Sasuke has officially vacated the 8 junior belts and all 8 belts will go to the winner of the September 23rd Yokohama match with Shinjiro Otani vs. El Samurai. The winner of that match defends on October 11th in Osaka against Ultimo Dragon. Since Pegasus, Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko and Black Tiger, Eddie Guerrero are all on the tour, it is something of a letdown to see Samurai put in the match for all 8 vacated titles. The tag team tournament will be October 12th with the finals on November 4th with Masahiro Chono and Hiroyoshi Tenzan, Riki Choshu, and Kensuke Sasaki, Shinya Hashimoto, and Scott Norton, Satoshi Kojima, and Kurosawa, Tatsumi Fujinami and Shiro Koshinaka, Rick Steiner and Mystery Partner, Keiji Muto and Mystery Partner, and Steve Regal and David Taylor. For whatever reason, and it appears most of this is because of better crowd micing, the August 24th and August 31st television shows, airing the G1 matches from August 5th and August 6th respectively, had the matches actually come across slightly better on television than they did live in the arena, which is saying something considering how good the August 5th show was live. With the dome cancelled, the belief right now is that Big Japan and Kendo Nagasaki will do some kind of an angle at the September 15th show in Nagoya, perhaps leading to some New Japan wrestlers appearing on the Big Japan Nagoya card the next day, and Nagasaki working an underneath singles match on September 23rd. August 31st TV did a 3.4 rating. Other Japan notes. Great Sasuke made his first public appearance since his injury on his own show on September 1st, but he had to be helped around the arena in a wheelchair. Michinoku Pro is going to keep its October 10th Sumo Hall booking even though its top draw can't appear, and the main event will be Hayabusa vs. Jinsei Shinzaki, Hakushi. It is believed that Nobuhiko Takada's final match with either New Japan or War will be on the October 11th Osaka show, so Takada and Yuhi Sano and Masahito Kakihara will probably have to drop the 6-man titles. Their opponents for that title defense still hasn't been decided. After that point the speculation is that Takada and maybe a few others from UWFI will affiliate themselves in All Japan feud. JWP has Sumo Hall booked on October 13th for a show which will be broadcast in a 3-hour live primetime television special on WoW. No matches have been announced except Dynamite Kansai and Asia Kong will form a tag team in the main event. I saw the top 2 matches on the Ring's August 24th show. The Danielson Maya vs. Ilukine Mikhail match was a shoot. What actually happened after the match is that it was ruled a draw and the Brazilians, in particular Maya and Renzo Gracie, started screaming to the ref that Maya should have won via decision, which he probably should have. Mikhail by this time had gone back to the dressing room, but his manager, Volkan, was still in there arguing with Gracie and with Akira Maeda. The argument didn't occur backstage as was reported here. Anyway, I guess Gracie told them that unless the match continued, they weren't going to have Ricardo Moraes come out for the main event, so Maeda ordered a restart. Mikhail didn't seem thrilled about it coming out, but even in the restart the finish was controversial as the ref stopped it when Maya caught Mikhail in an inverted cross arm breaker, but Mikhail hadn't submitted yet. Moraes vs. Yoshihisa Yamamoto went 46 seconds and it was really too short to tell if it was a work or a shoot, although I'd guess the latter. It looked no more or no less real than the Mike Tyson-Bruce Seldon match, and even though the fans were nicer about it than the boxing fans, you can imagine that they weren't thrilled that their top star losing that fast in the main event. What was surprising after seeing it on tape was the Kimo vs. Kazushi Sakuraba match on July 14th, which I figured was a work since it set up Kimo's appearances on the UWFI shows. From seeing the tape, That match was a shoot and an exciting one that as Sakuraba was impressive being competitive. Hiromichi Fuyuki debuts for IWA on its September tour. Mr. Pogo was at a few of the FMW house shows last week. He was dressed up in his gimmick but didn't wrestle because of his neck injury, but is expected to return for the next tour. The two biggest shows on that tour are September 20th in Sapporo at Nakajima Sports Center with Headhunters defending the Brass Knucks tag titles against Wing Kanemura and Haido. Taka Michinoku defends the independent junior title against Riki Fuji. Pogo vs. Super Leather in a Texas death match. Masato Tanaka and Koji Nakagawa and Tetsuhiro Kuroda defend the World Street Fight 6-man titles against Terry Funk and the Gladiator and Horace Boulder, and Hayabusa vs. Hisakatsu Oya with the winner getting a shot at Kanemura's world title. On September 24th at Korakuen Hall the main is Hayabusa and Pogo and Tanaka vs. Funk and Gladiator and Boulder. Tokyo Pro Wrestling has a tour from September 15th to October 8th, with Abdullah the Butcher, Black Wazma, Too Cold Scorpio, and Shocker as the top foreigners. Opening night in Aomori has Yoji Anjo and Tiger Mask Sayama defending the TWA tag titles against Abdullah and Daiko Kubo Benkei, and a handicap match with Takashi Ishikawa vs. Shinobu Tamura and Shigeo Okamura and Gecko. Storyline there is that those were the three wrestlers who complained about Ishikawa and got him removed as company president. The match to determine the new company president between Ishikawa vs. Anjo is on October 8th in Osaka, which also has Sayama vs. Great Kabuki, Abdullah vs. and a junior heavyweight tournament with Gecko, Tamura, and Shocker. Jaguar Yokota appeared on the JWP show on September 8th at Korakuen Hall beating Hiromi Yagi. And in what is believed to be a world record for the longest title stipulation match in history, on September 30th in Omiya, Shoji Nakamaki faces Mitsuhiro Matsunaga in a chandelier broken glass cabinet drum barbed wire baseball bat barbed wire street fight death match. Beulah and Patricia from ECW won't be appearing on the next IWA tour. On the UWFI show a few months back, the masked wrestler 200% Machine is Tom Burton, 150% Machine is the wrestler Kamikaze from Wrestle Dream Factory, and 100% Machine is indie wrestler Fukumendoro. USWA. Bill and Jamie Dundee beat the Moondogs on September 3rd in Louisville to win the USWA tag titles. Moondogs appear to be gone. The Labor Day show with Jerry Lawler and Scott Bowden putting up their hair against Sid Vicious' unified title, which naturally Lawler regained, did a poor house of about $3,800, about 700 fans, which is probably still profitable since the flea market has so much lower costs than the Mid-South Coliseum. Neither Lawler nor Vicious was even brought up at television this week since both are on the road working for WWF. They move back to Friday this coming week, September 13th, with a card billed as a series of dream matches. The storyline is that Bart Sawyer's dream match was a singles match against Steve Dahl. Referee Bill Rush's dream match was a match against referee Frank Morrell with the winner getting to be the full-time USWA referee on the road. Mike Sample's dream match was against Flash Flanagan. Brickhouse Brown's dream match was against Coco Ware. If he wins, Ware has to form a tag team with him. Bill Dundee's dream match is a singles match with Randy Hales, and if Dundee wins, he gets to become Booker. I'm not making that one up. They came up with a plausible storyline to explain the inexplicable. Hales said that if he knew Dundee was going to pick a match against him as a dream match that he would never have done the dream match concept, but that if he didn't agree to the match, the entire clique, Dundee's, Tommy Rich, Tony Falk, Samantha, wouldn't work the show and he wouldn't be able to put on the card. Dundee said that if Hales just agreed to let him run the promotion he wouldn't beat him up, but Hales said he'd rather have his neck broken than hand the job over to Dundee. Miss Texas' dream match was a back alley street fight, strip match, against Luna Vachon. Jamie Dundee's dream match was a handicap match with he and Father Bill against Wolfie D. Brian Christopher's dream match was a singles match against manager Scott Bowden. Wolfie D's dream match was a tag match with Jesse James Armstrong against the Dundees in a barbed wire match. Tommy Rich's dream match was a match against Christopher with Tony Falk as referee, with the winner getting title shots at both Lawler's unified title and also at Shawn Michaels' WWF title, and the loser having to leave town for 30 days. Since Rich is booked starting in 2 weeks for IWA in Japan, I guess that tells you what you need to know about that result. Luna is now doing a gimmick where she bites people on the neck where they say she is biting the carotid artery and it acts like a sleeper hold. It looks like she's giving the guys a hickey and they pass out. They are out of Nashville for 4 weeks because of the fair. ECW. There were no shows this past week, with them returning to action with shows this upcoming weekend. September 13th in Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania is entitled The Unlucky Lottery with Sabu vs. Rob Van Dam. Sandman and Tommy Dreamer vs. Raven and Brian Lee in a stipulations to be drawn at ringside match. Perry Saturn vs. Pitbull No. 2, Gangstas vs. Shane Douglas and a partner he picks at ringside in an ECW tag title match. Dan Crawford and Doug Furness vs. Mikey Whipwreck and Louis Spicolli. Axel Rotten and Hack Myers vs. Bubba Ray Dudley and Devon Dudley in a Nightmare Partners match. Basically the AAA Parejas Increíbles gimmick. A match that must end via submission with Taz vs. Little Guido plus Steve Williams and Johnny Smith. September 14th is billed as When Worlds Collide, and besides already announced Terry Gordy and Williams and Dreamer vs. Eliminators and Lee, Raven vs. Pitbull No. 2 and Sabu and Van Dam vs. Crawford and Furness, will be Douglas vs. Spicolli for the TV title, Taz vs. Smith, Bubba vs. Rotten and a tag title match to be announced. September 20th in Plymouth Meeting, Pennsylvania has Raven vs. Van Dam, Sabu vs. Saturn, Douglas vs. Pitbull No. 2, Gangstas vs. JT Smith and Guido for the tag titles, Dreamer vs. John Cronus in a weapons match, Taz vs. Smith and Gordy vs. Lee in a match that can only end with the Oriental Spike. September 21st in Middletown, New York has Raven vs. Sandman in a cage match for the title, Sabu and Van Dam vs. Eliminators, Gangstas defend tag titles against Samoan Gangsta Party, Gordy vs. Lee in the Oriental Spike match. Douglas defends TV title against Pitbull No. 2 and Taz vs. Smith. Axel Rotten's new gimmick is not a gay gimmick based on local indie wrestler Twiggy Ramirez but a punk music gimmick based on Marilyn Mason. The proposed, but never announced publicly, ECW dates for October in New Orleans and Biloxi, Mississippi are definitely off. There were also very preliminary talks about running a show at the Olympic in Los Angeles, but that doesn't look like it's going to happen anytime soon. The plan right now is to build for the biggest show of the year on November 16th as the November to Remember. It's a definite that won't be a pay-per-view show, nor that there will be a pay-per-view date for at least 4 months, as to properly market something new like that you need to give the cable companies a good 4-month advance on the date, and as of right now nothing of that type has been done. Joel Gertner is a riot doing the heel ring announcer gimmick, although it's basically the short-term payoff stuff. He insults the fans and Sandman canes him here and there. The reason the Frank Shamrock vs. Alan Goes match didn't air on the Kings of Pancrase pay-per-view was due to legal reasons. There is a lawsuit pending between Goes and Pancrase regarding Goes tearing his Achilles tendon in the match, so Pancrase didn't want the match broadcast in the U.S. According to Peter William, Otto Wann's co-promoter of the CWA, the reason Max Payne and Brian Armstrong left is because they had planned on doing a hard rock CD in the Austria with Payne playing guitar and Armstrong singing. The deal fell through. Otto Wann's is similar to Giant Baba in his traditional approach, so wouldn't let Payne use the guitar as a gimmick. Besides, as mentioned before, crowds in business are way down. To show how bad, they've announced that there will be no tournament next year in Vienna, which is something that has been held annually since World War II. The main reasons, besides low attendance, is that noise regulations for the outdoor shows are now that the cards must end at 10 p.m. and they were unable to get a license to allow them to keep the shows going until 11 p.m., and also that taxes are high. Wands pays both a sports tax and an entertainment tax because, as a traditionalist, he refuses to admit pro wrestling is worked and thus pays the sports tax. Apparently the government promised Wands and the other local promoters that as soon as they admit that they aren't sport, the government would pay the sports tax back, but the government, which is in a financial bind, has changed its mind and is forcing the local promoters to pay both taxes. The WWF doesn't have this problem because they admitted that their shows weren't sport to local town councils. The next CWA tournament starts September 12th in Hanover. The biggest shows on the tour will be October 5th when old-timers Rene Lasartes and Axel Dieter will be brought back for a Legends match, and on October 12th when Franz Schumann defends the CWA middleweight title against Mike Lazansky. Oregon Championship Wrestling has a show September 13th in Eugene, Oregon with Moondog Moretti and the Cat and Lil Nasty Boy vs. Billy Two Eagles and Amy Burns and Cowboy Lang. The North-South Wrestling Alliance based in South Carolina has been fined $900 by the State Athletic Commission for running shows without a license and using unlicensed wrestlers. Daniel Bird of P.O. Box 105, Natrona Heights, Pennsylvania 15065 has put out a booklet for $5 listing real names and with trivia questions largely WWF related. Upcoming indie dates in the Baltimore area are September 13th MUF in Dundalk, Maryland, September 14th MUF in College Park, Maryland, September 21st IPWA in Alexandria, Virginia, October 13th MUF in Dundalk, Maryland, and October 26th IPWA in Alexandria, Virginia. Any East Coast promoters looking to book MUF wrestlers can contact Bob Starr at 7490 Raban Avenue, Baltimore, Maryland 21222. Wahoo McDaniel continues to work his retirement match as gimmicks throughout the Carolinas. Larry Sharpe and King Kong Bundy have put out a comedy/serious book as a guide to becoming a pro wrestler called Hit in the Mat at Department 188, Mantua, New Jersey 08051. For example, in the do's and don'ts of being a pro wrestler, they emphasize good hygiene. No one wants to wrestle someone who stinks or has bad breath. Even if your gimmick is to be a stinking bum, but a good-smelling stinking bum. The Mickey Doyle retirement on August 16 reportedly actually drew 682. Some CWA updates at the Dallas Sportatorium. The August 30 show drew 1,100 fans, about 450 of which were paid for a Charlie Norris vs. one-man gang cage match plus high voltage, not the WCW team, winning the tag titles from the Sicilian Studs, and Terry Gordy worked the show. Grizzly Smith was let go as booker because Devin Michaels wanted to run things on his own, and being a bodybuilder type, really wants to push guys with muscles on top. Chris Adams taped television in Terrell, Texas on September 5 with Johnny Mantell and James Beard as his bookers, and they have house shows in the Louisiana/Mississippi area booked for October. Reckless Youth beat Derek Domino to win the NWA North American title on the September 7 show in Yardville, New Jersey. The champion was Tommy Cairo, but he no-showed. The highlight of the show was Iron Sheik doing the Macarena dance, which apparently was hilarious, and it does sound like it has possibilities. The Von Erich 30-minute episode on A Current Affair was rebroadcast the last week of August. The Power Zone wrestling ring, owned by Tom Jones, was apparently stolen, as there was an article this past weekend about the missing ring saying it was the same ring that people like Danny Hodge and the Von Erichs wrestled in. The police report valued the ring, which has been used for wrestling matches in Oklahoma for 50 years, at $10,000. Eric Shaw is attempting to put together a show for October 24 in the Los Angeles area with Stevie Richards, Blue Meanie and Rob Van Dam, but don't know location yet. WCW. Sean Waltman officially got his release this past week from WWF after all, and is legal and available to work WCW, and is expected to be introduced either on the pay-per-view or Nitro next week. It certainly appears that two companies are playing childish games with each other on items like this. The Minis matches this week at house shows and on pay-per-view have been cancelled. The original plan was for Mascarada Sagrada Jr. to wrestle Espectrito I, and the match was to be announced on Nitro as taking place on Fall Brawl on the September 9 Nitro show. That fell through because they were already booked in Mexico. The second plan was for Mini Frisbee to wrestle Espectrito II at the September 15 pay-per-view and on September 16 Nitro, along with on a few house shows, but that has also fallen through because so many of the AAA wrestlers don't have proper working papers. The plan for now is for the Minis to be brought in when all the paperwork is taken care of. The Nitro originally planned for October 28 at the Los Angeles Sports Arena has been moved to the America West Arena in Phoenix. If the NWO team wins at War Games, which it almost certainly will, the stipulations are that the NWO gets its own segment on television, which will also allow Hall, Nash and the rest to wrestle on television matches and get their own tag team titles. There was a lot of internal turmoil over the past week regarding how the angle on September 2 went down, basically killing off the Horsemen. Ric Flair, whose contract expires in November, once again made noises about taking time off, and Steve McMichael is said to be pretty unhappy about how everything went down. Other mid-card wrestlers are also unhappy because of the belief that Hogan won't let anyone else but his guys get over, and they're already over, so they don't have to hold anyone else back. Of course, with the ratings where they are and Hogan signed through 1998, don't expect things to change much. Hogan himself had a major scare on September 8, as he was on his jet ski riding around with his 6-year-old son Nicholas Balia tied to the back in an inner tube when there was a serious accident as Nicholas crashed into pilings. It could have been worse, but the extent of the injuries were that Nicholas suffered a concussion and needed stitches in his head, and his arm was put in a sling, but overall will be fine. Hogan still showed up for Nitro the next day because he felt it was important to be part of the last angle before the pay-per-view show. The basic plan for Halloween Havoc right now is Benoit and Anderson versus Meng and Barbarian, Ultimo Dragon versus Jushin Liger for the 8 belts, Diamond Dallas Page versus Eddie Guerrero, Rey Mysterio Jr. defending the Cruiserweight title against Dean Malenko, Harlem Heat defending the tag titles against the Steiners, Ric Flair defending the U.S. title against the Giant, Hogan defending the WCW title against Randy Savage, and a few more matches to be decided upon. Former SMW referee Mark Curtis, Brian Hildebrand, is now a regular ref in WCW, replacing Randy Eller, who appears to have been fired. Nitro on September 9 in Columbus, Georgia, which drew 6,000 fans, not sure how much was paid but the gate was $54,000, saw Super Colo pin Pat Tanaka in 224 and Tanaka tried a form of a superplex and Colo landed on him for the pin. Colo moved well in his debut, but there was a style clash, so the match wasn't good. They had a commercial for the official NWO t-shirts. Homemade NWO t-shirts are a big thing at most of the arenas right now. Nasty Boys beat Amazing French Canadians, what a goofy name, who were announced by their real names, Jacques Rougeau Jr. and Carl Ouellet. There was no hints that these two were a championship tag team elsewhere or that they were major stars in Canada or anything, and they came out basically in a glorified jobber role. Finish saw Knobs hit Ouellet with his French flag and Sags pinned him in 3:25. It was Rougeau's first match since his retirement match 2 years ago, and he didn't do much. Ouellet, who has gained a ton of weight in all the wrong places, did a bunch of acrobatic moves anyway and sort of reminded me of a younger Adrian Adonis in that he was way more agile than you'd think he could be given his body type. Gene Okerlund called them the Rougeau brothers. Wonder if Vince will send a nasty legal letter, since I'm sure he's got that trademarked. Scott Norton beat Craig Pittman in a submission match in 2:59 when Ice Train threw the towel in as Pittman was caught in the Flash Black Wakigatami. Juventud Guerrera beat Joe Gomez in 2:12 with a springboard screw splash, called Hero Con Plancha. This match killed the show live. It was a horrible match to book because of the size difference, huge technical discrepancy, not to mention style clash. Gomez really screwed the match up and was yelled at backstage, but the real problem was putting the match together in the first place. Rick Steiner beat Luger via countout in 6:59 when Patrick came out and called Luger to the back for the Sting angle. Rey Mysterio Jr. kept the Cruiserweight belt, beating Billy Kidman in 1:39. They could have had a great match but were given no time. Meng and Barbarian NC Public Enemy in 10:41. Match was awful except for one amazing spot where Barbarian came off the top rope to the floor and crashed through a table when Grunge moved. Rocco also moonsaulted Meng through a table. The match fell apart at the end. They did a Dungeon of Doom interview with Conan in his new guise as a Mexican gang member. Main event saw John Cena beat Randy Savage via countout in 3 minutes when Teddy Long came out and called Savage to the back. All the WCW wrestlers at the end surrounded 2 limos, but the NWO guys were gone. But they had spray paint cans and they attempted to spray paint WCW on their limos, but it didn't work since it was pouring rain in the parking lot. I thought the TV was good because of angles and intrigue, but it was horrible as a live show with the short matches and terrible finishes. The fans live were furious, booing heavily after the show because they didn't know about the angles in the parking lot, and all they saw were guys walking out in the middle of matches. All this wasn't lost on WCW, as they are going to buy a video wall and bring it to all Nitros starting in January. Currently they rent one for pay-per-view shows. They're also going back to Columbus, Georgia for a show in December and going to only charge $5 a head for tickets as a way to make it up to the fans in the city. Starrcade is now planned for December 29th at the Nashville Municipal Auditorium. There had been talk of Tokyo. Nitros in December are December 2nd in Dayton, Ohio, December 9th in Charlotte, December 16th in Pensacola, December 23rd in Macon, Georgia, and December 30th in Knoxville. TV ratings for the weekend of August 31st to September 2nd were main event at 1.5, Saturday night at 2.6, Pro at 1.2, and Nitro with a 4.3 rating and 7.0 share, 4.0 first hour, 4.6 seconds hour, and the Nitro replay with a 1.2 rating and 2.8 share. The Nitro rating actually would have been a record 4.4 had they not ended the show 9 minutes early, which was a screw-up big time. What happened was they didn't do the Steiners vs. Sting and Luger match because Scott is injured and can't work, so they did a 39 seconds match when it was blocked off for 6 minutes, and the Randy Savage squash that week also went short and the 8-man didn't make up for the lost time for whatever reason. The angle at the end, while entertaining television, was poorly planned from a time management standpoint. And then Hogan and Giant did an estimated $40,000 damage to the set in something that wasn't planned. The peak rating for Nitro that week was 4.7 for the Horseman vs. Dungeon match, and the rating fell off during the post-match angle. For the weekend of September 7th to September 9th, main event did a 1.4, Saturday night a 2.5, Pro a 1.7, Glacier debut after 6 months of hype, and Nitro did a 3.7, 3.7 first hour, 3.7 seconds hour, and Nitro replay did a 1.4. The Baywatch episode filmed last year with Hulk Hogan, Randy Savage, Ric Flair, Vader, Kevin Sullivan, and others from WCW was rerun this past week. Saturday night tapings on September 4th in Gainesville, Georgia, before a papered full house of 1,800 saw him among highlights. Page over Duggan via DQ when Patrick DQ'd him for using a closed fist. Bobby Walker over Anderson via DQ when Patrick DQ'd him for an over-the-top rope. BK Wall Street over Savage via DQ when Savage used an elbow off the top on ref Randy Anderson. Bobby Eaton pinned David Taylor when Jeeves tripped Taylor in a bad match, Chris Jericho pinned Kidman in a good match and a bunch of squashes. The actual crowd for WCW's house show on August 31st in Utica, New York was 1,114. Business was much better this past weekend, with shows that were weak on paper, with 3 matches deep with Hall and Nash and Giant over Bubba and Meng and Barbarian. Barbarian missed Shreveport, so more sub. Luger over Flair in what fans live were led to believe was a U.S. title match, but when Luger won, no announcement of a title change was made and Flair left with the belt and Heat keeping the tag titles, beating Rick Steiner and Terry Taylor. Sub for Scott, Drew $6,810, $6,107 paid, and $60. 911 on September 6th in Shreveport, $5,463 paid and $52,914 on September 7th in Little Rock, and $2,406 paid and $31,635 on September 8th in Jackson, Tennessee. WCW may have a minor Germany tour from December 3rd to December 16th, but a lot of the major names would be kept home to do Nitros. Glacier debuted on television on Sunday. They played it up huge. He didn't look particularly good or bad, but overall he's mainly an elaborate ring entrance doing a martial arts comic book type gimmick aimed at a kid's audience. Scott Hall's head was split when Savage did the chair shot on him on the September 2nd Nitro. It appears that Nancy Sullivan fell out of her top on that show, although the camera switched to the opposite angle, saving her embarrassment before it happened. It appeared to be during the finish, where she bent over to hold Ric Flair's hands while she had the figure 4 on Kevin Sullivan. Another faux pas of live television was when Giant climbed off the podium during the brawl. Moments after that, he tripped and took a spill on the floor, but at least he had the poise to recover and beat everyone up rather than overreact to it. On the September 9th show, Bobby Heenan accidentally called Meng Haku, and Bischoff did an elaborate on-air apology for it, saying that Haku was his WWF name and he's in no way associated with the WWF. Hogan's second home in Los Angeles, his 18,000-square-foot mansion, is in the Clearwater, Florida area. A 3,700-square-foot home, which he bought from the late Red Fox, is on sale for $1.5 million. Bischoff was negotiating a new deal with Savage this past week. WWF. Undertaker missed the weekend house shows due to a staph infection in his arm. He kept the arm open doing the Boiler Room match on August 18th, and it apparently got infected over Labor Day weekend when he worked some shots in Puerto Rico for Carlos Colon. He was hospitalized and pumped full of 4 fluids to kill the infection, but wasn't well in time to make the shots. There is chance he'll be ready for this coming weekend's shows, but it's a day-to-day deal. With Undertaker off the tour, they brought in Mark Henry and, of all people, Cowboy Bill Watts, to work angles with Mankind. Henry worked in Austin, Houston, and Dallas, ending up using the bear hug on Mankind. Not sure of the exact angle Watts did in Oklahoma City. I didn't get a report from Tulsa, so I'm not sure if Watts did the same thing or not, but would assume that he did. I believe Watts did an interview where he talked about how great the WWF was, and then Paul Bearer came out and Watts ended up slapping him in the face, and then Mankind jumped Watts. It was described as the same angle Watts did with Jim Cornette and the Midnight Express in early 1984, which built to probably the biggest house show run in the history of Mid-South wrestling. Weekend house shows had Bushwhackers over Justin Bradshaw and Zeb Farouk over Bob Holly, Jose Lothario over Jim Cornette, very short match since Cornette's knee has been swollen of late. Stalker over Jerry Lawler, Guns vs. Grimm Twins, finishes have been Guns winning or double count outs. Sid vs. Vader, finishes have been DDQs and Sid winning, and Shawn Michaels over Goldust. Report from Dallas and Oklahoma City were that both shows were pretty weak, with Michaels Goldust the only match in even the 2 stars range either night. Business continued strong as Austin on September 5th drew $3,454 and $49,557. Houston on September 6th drew $6,948 and $95,314, which is a great figure going against high school football, which is almost a religion in Texas. Dallas on September 7th drew $7,326 and $106,425, which is the biggest WWF crowd and gate ever in that market and the biggest crowd in the market since around 1987. Oklahoma City on September 8th for an afternoon show did $3,405 and $49,485, which is the WWF's best gate in the city since 1990. And Tulsa on September 8th at night drew $3,485 and $47,999, which is the WWF's best gate ever in Tulsa. Henry got what was described as a polite response to his angle, but there are lots of catcalls when they announce him as the world's strongest man.
They really should cool it on that, because even if one can make an argument that's true, because his performance in the Olympics is so visible, fans don't buy it and it gets him negative heat.
Although that negative heat is nothing compared to the reaction from at least some fellow wrestlers who are jealous of his guaranteed contract without having had one match and the fact he was being paid by the WWF during his Olympic training. It's similar to the heat a few years ago on the bodybuilders.
The wrestlers have the mentality that they draw all the money and get paid based on what they draw and take the bumps, and resent guys getting money that they believe they've derived for the company without going on the road and taking bumps, somehow like it's stealing money from them. It's a pretty lame attitude in some ways that dates back to the territory and Carney days, but it is still prevalent among wrestlers who don't get guaranteed money. Those on guaranteed contracts look at things differently. Henry also has heat due to bad personality mixes. Not that his personality is bad, but there are those who perceive it as such, and then all the other aspects go into it as well. I wouldn't be shocked to see a surprise WWF title change at a house show before the October pay-per-view show to Vader. 2 hints have been thrown, plus the fact that the October 20th pay-per-view show from Indianapolis won't have Michaels on the show.
The double main is Sid vs. Vader and a buried alive match with Undertaker vs. Mankind. The steps for the latter appear to be something along the lines of they'll create a cemetery set with an open grave and the match will start in the ring and end when one buries the other in the grave and pours the dirt on him. Current plan for the new TV season starting the weekend of September 21st and September 22nd goes like this.
Mania will undergo a total facelift at 10 a.m. Saturday mornings, being interactive with phone calls, faxes, email notes, etc. with a wrestler in studio. They're attempting to add a show on WGN at 11 a.m. to follow Mania on Saturday mornings, with the one show leading to the other, but that isn't a done deal. On Sunday, Action Zone will be gone and Superstars will take its place, but it'll be moved up 1 hour to 11 a.m. to avoid the NFL pregame shows on the networks. Superstars will be pulled from syndication and the main show in syndication will be entitled Challenge, but no word on what form that show will take, as they aren't going back to doing separate tapings for Challenge. There are other television proposals out there, and McMahon still wants to do a late Saturday night ECW-like live show from New York, but the idea of doing it on pay-per-view has been dropped. The final Superstars show in syndication this coming weekend will be 10 years of highlights of the show and supposedly air famous clips with lots of people who aren't with the company any longer. All charges were dropped in Syracuse, New York against the military guys who attacked Shawn Michaels, Davey Boy Smith, and Sean Waltman last October. Don't know why. On the Raw Championship Friday, Brian Pillman said that he was going to interview Bret Hart at the September 22nd Mind Games pay-per-view. While there is a 1% chance this will change, the plan right now is that Hart won't be there, and they are going to attempt to make it clear to fans ahead of time that Hart won't be there, because the last thing they need now is the idea that they are using Hart to sell the pay-per-view show and have him not show up. The working plan is for Pillman to do something that winds up mocking Hart. Hart did return on September 8th in Durban, South Africa for a one-week tour. The first show of the tour did a sellout 9,000 fans, and I believe the entire tour will be sold out with Hart as the main attraction. They are taping a live national television special in South Africa on September 14th, in Sun City, headlined by Hart vs. Steve Austin, and they may shoot an angle there to build up Hart's return at Survivor Series. Kurt Angle, the Olympic gold medalist in freestyle wrestling at 220 pounds, was in the office on September 5th and had a meeting with Vince McMahon. They must feel that there's a decent shot of getting him because that fact was announced on television, but there is no deal done at this point. Interest has also been expressed in Matt Ghaffari, who took the silver in Greco-Roman in the super heavyweight division, losing to Alexander Karelin. Tom Pritchard is regularly training Dwayne Johnson, Flex Kavana in USWA, Henry and Chaim Albrecht for debuts shortly. Henry starts out on the next pay-per-view against Jerry Lawler. Johnson, with his background in the sport and some experience, is the most advanced in the class. Albrecht has a soccer and boxing background before he got into a high level of competitive bodybuilding. He's in his early 30s, which is fairly late to start. I guess the idea of using him is both the physique fetish, which McMahon has had great success in the past at marketing, and also to try and create a German superstar for the European tours. Ghaffari is 34 or 35, but then again, Iron Sheik started at about the same age with a very similar background and had a very successful career. They are hopeful to get Brian Pillman in the ring by mid-November, but it's too early to pinpoint a date, and hopeful for Ahmed Johnson to return by the December pay-per-view show. Johnson is said to be feeling a lot better. An update regarding the Toronto Sky Dome show on January 31st. Sky Dome has both the big setup which they used for WrestleMania 6 and an arena setup which WCW once used. The arena setup would be to just put seats on the stadium floor and lower deck and accommodate 20,000, which is the idea, not to do a major stadium show that night. It's simply a move to Sky Dome as the regular Toronto house show arena from Maple Leaf Gardens because Sky Dome has been wanting WWF as a regular tenant for some time.
September 29th in Madison Square Garden has Stalker vs. Goon, Bob Holly vs. Salvatore Sincere, Alex Porto vs. Justin Bradshaw, Freddie Joe Floyd vs. Hunter Hearst Helmsley, Jake Roberts vs. T.L. Hopper, a Four Corners tag match for the titles with Owen and Davey Boy, Guns, Godwins, and Grimm Twins, Savio Vega vs. Steve Austin, Mark Merrow vs. Farouk for the IC title, Sid vs. Vader in a lumberjack match, and Michaels and Undertaker vs. Goldust and Mankind. It'll be interesting to see how this does because it'll be the first time WWF has attempted to run the New York market without local syndicated television since around 1968. TV ratings for the weekend of August 31st to September 1st saw both Mania and Action Zone do 1.3 ratings.
For September 6th to September 9th, the Raw special did a 1.8, Mania a 1.2, Action Zone 1.7 and Raw 2.4.
For whatever this is worth, Raw's audience consisted of 35% kids and teens, its highest percentage to date, or its lowest percentages of adult audience to date, however one wants to take it, while Nitro's audience in the second hour head-to-head was 83% adults and 17% kids and teens. The reader's pages. Thez book.
I recently had the chance to compare the Luthez book Hooker with the Japanese translation edition by Koji Miyamoto, and the difference was shockingly large. Although the Japanese hardcover fancy book contained 200 photos and was sold nationally through Baseball Magazine Shaw as opposed to the mail-order process of the American book, the Japanese book completely omitted any kayfabe information and was written as an autobiography of a hero called the Iron Man. I can't say that it was bad, since the Japanese appreciate pro wrestling living legends more than Americans and circulation figures are everything in that industry. Because the book sold to the general public, the publisher decided to keep the myth and fantasy about Luthez and pro wrestling. The final outcome is there are two very different autobiographies of the same person. But I was deeply moved by the historical facts one could only learn from the English version, and I speak very highly of that book. It was another example of weekly pro wrestling style, which is heavily edited and skewed print journalism. I found a letter in the reader's page saying that Tarzan Yamamoto should have covered New Japan shows from paid seats and not doing so was his mistake. However, weekly pro has never been true journalism. It's a double structural illusion derived from pro wrestling. It's part shoot journalism, of course, and even includes work shoot print angles, but it is still the magazine fantasy that we all love, so it would have been foolish for it to report on New Japan matches at that time. I know that many Observer readers subscribe to Weekly Pro only for the photos, and I would rate it as the world's finest photojournalism wrestling magazine. It's worth paying more than $10 each week to get it in the United States. But as evident in the Luthez book, you may be aware that in essence it is still the same as a Bill Apter magazine. I have nothing against that. As with being in the ring, customers and readers have a right to choose and pay for what they want, and pro wrestling is a work business. Some people prefer Atsushi Onita's theatrical wed drama. Others enjoy shoot fighting. I personally enjoy lucha libre. The problem in Japan is that there is no Observer or 900 lines, and that's why Yamamoto's last word was that journalism was dead. The only true wrestling journalism in Japanese was probably my own book, Worldwide Pro Wrestling, published in 1995 by Shueisha. Shueisha is the nation's top publisher, and it's rare that the giant Random House type firm published a pro wrestling book for the mass market. The reason I bring my own book up is that when I read Hooker, it was if I was reading my own book in English. Especially the first chapter was amazingly similar to a chapter in my book. I was so happy since the biggest legend in pro wrestling explained this bizarre world in the same way I did. The August 14th Observer was your masterpiece issue, and it's my regret that many Japanese fans have not yet discovered it. As a native who grew up watching Antonio Inoki, the article shows the realization of the international video age. Regardless of nationality or where you currently live, wrestling fans share many of the same values of this universal industry. I'd like to bring up two matches in detail since I felt it made sense for readers. The first was the Muhammad Ali vs. Antonio Inoki match on June 26, 1976. Although you stated it ended up as a shoot, I believe the time limit draw decision was predetermined. But it was not a worked match. They never rehearsed anything or discussed doing high spots. My belief comes from reading Hisashi Shinma's book called Goodbye Antonio Inoki, 1993. The manager of Inoki for 26 years never stated this in print, but there were hints if you read between the lines. He wrote it as if the draw ending was the provision that allowed New Japan to not pay Ali the $6.1 million. The $1.8 million had already been paid in advance before Ali had arrived in Tokyo.
Remember, at that time the exchange rate for $1 was 300 yen, and money figures of this type were simply unheard of in Japan for any form of show business.
No matter what happened beforehand, it was still something of a shoot match, and it's the right thing to compare it to the Dan Severn vs. Ken Shamrock match. I found the same strained atmosphere in that match.
What happened was beyond both fighters' wildest imaginations or game plans, as they fought a very serious fight with enormous fear of the skills of the other. Ali himself admitted that the match with Inoki was a very fearful experience.
I firmly believe had there never been an Ali-Inoki match, there would have been no UWF, rings, Pancrase, or even UFC today.
It's interesting to note that in the 20th anniversary Ali Inoki book published by Weekly Gong, the editor stuck to his beliefs that the match was a shoot, and that's why it was so boring for the general public. While I didn't learn anything new from that book, it's great that Japanese are always trying to learn from the past and that new wrestling fans are learning important history from buying that book. Karl Gotch, who taught the art of hooking to Yoshiaki Fujiwara and many others, seconded Inoki in the match with Ali.
He was interviewed in the book and talked about Pancrase, his ideal pro wrestling promotion.
While he praised Masakatsu Funaki and Minoru Suzuki, his last two true students, he questioned why the Shamrock brothers were pushed in Pancrase since he sees them as street fighters and not wrestlers. He sure never changed after all these years. Although Inoki lost a lot of his reputation with the public and well as experienced a financial debt from the Ali match, he learned an important lesson which made him a strong leader of the innovative venture capital business known as New Japan Pro Wrestling. That leadership later led to him earning a senatorial seat for one term, so pro wrestling historians need to focus more on the importance of that one night in Budokan. Inoki took the blame for the poor match, but there was a difference from the Shamrock Severn UFC match since Inoki was both the wrestler in the match and the promoter of the match. Unlike the Vince McMahon-Hulk Hogan relationship, Shinma, a real-life religionist, was a business and artistic manager, so Inoki's burden as a top star was much bigger than that of Shawn Michaels today. Everyone liked seeing Ali at the Atlanta Olympics.
I'd like to mention that Inoki was the only opponent of Ali who kept in contact with him.
Over the last few years, they appeared together in peace and harmony-related events in Cuba, Los Angeles, North Korea, and Tokyo. It is well known that Ali learned his showmanship that made him the world's most famous athlete by growing up watching Gorgeous George and Fred Blassie. However, it was Inoki who made him respect pro wrestling as a sport. The other match I'd like to talk about was the Hulk Hogan vs. Inoki match on June 2, 1983. Your writing might give the impression that an accident happened during the match, but it was actually a work. It was a Hisashi Shinma super angle which fooled everyone, long before Brian Pillman Kevin Sullivan took place, and the impact was huge.
A famous example was that many young Japanese, including 15-year-old Minoru Suzuki, decided to become pro wrestlers after watching that match in order to gain revenge on Hogan for their hero.
The most amazing fact was that all of the national media, network television news and newspapers blindly bought the angle. The media that didn't cover pro wrestling reported Inoki going to the hospital and legitimate major news. Naturally, after finding out the truth, the media bashed pro wrestling as fake, so Shinma's absolute peak as booker actually ended up hurting the industry. While things didn't take place as planned, it was an angle to explain the physical decline of Inoki.
Most agree that Inoki's peak as an athlete was 1974-75, and by this point in time, Inoki suffered from a serious case of diabetes.
He was unable to wrestle for 3 months, but not because of an incident in that match, but from diabetes and other related illnesses. Where New Japan is distinguished as different from WWF and WCW is the concept of athletic credibility. Although the IWGP tournament was Inoki's baby, because of his illness, the booking committee gave the chance to a young and powerful Hogan. Neither the AWA nor the WWF created Hogan. Japanese fans first discovered his enormous potential as a star in 1983 was during his athletic prime. It's sad that most Americans saw Hogan after 1984. Vince McMahon's brilliant marketing idea was simply a theft, using what had already happened within New Japan as his own market research plan. The last thing I'd like to mention wasn't a wrestling match, but something that happened on October 14, 1989. While Senator Inoki was delivering a speech at a political meeting, a thug assaulted him with a knife and Inoki was bloodied. All the television and newspapers covered it as a major news story, and nothing different has ever been revealed today. But I wasn't the only one who smelled an angle. I'm not surprised by anything that happens within the wrestling world, but I was scared when I saw the television coverage all over the place. I believe that was the point when Shinma recognized Inoki wasn't living in reality. When Shinma learned that Inoki made a secret deal to offset his big debt in exchange for dropping out of the race to be mayor of Tokyo, Shinma went public. It was Shinma's mercy as not revealing everything that may have kept Inoki out of jail and enabled him to finish his senatorial term. This year is the 5th anniversary of Riki Choshu being the executive booker of New Japan Pro Wrestling. At the 5th G1 tournament, he finally put himself over.
But as a longtime New Japan follower, never liked his way of thinking, including his views of wrestling journalism, and I know I'm not the only one with that feeling among the generation that watched the Ali and Inoki match live on television. Choshu made a famous remark saying that Tarzan Yamamoto is the UWF concept itself. It was funny that the man in charge of New Japan admitted that the UWF movement was not created by Akira Maeda or Nobuhiko Okada, but manipulated by the editor of a wrestling magazine. He recognized Yamamoto as not only his biggest enemy but his main rival as being the most influential person in the pro wrestling industry. As a wrestling booker, it is impossible to satisfy all the different types of wrestling audiences at the same time.
However, Keiji Yamada is the rare exception, so he is the best booker in the world in the New Japan Junior Heavyweight division. If one is running a major league promotion, they need to target the marks, smarks and smart fans combination. Choshu focused too much on what smarks think through reading too much Weekly Pro. I believe that's the real problem with the pro wrestling scene in Japan today. Live attendance is record-breaking and magazine readership is high, but that's all within the pro wrestling village. In the real world outside the village, weekly television ratings air in the late-night time slot and ratings are low. The turnover rate among wrestling fans has shortened because they don't promote in a way to cultivate longtime fans. Many pro wrestling insiders were happy to see Yamamoto go, but I hope Choshu ends up being punished as well. Otherwise, many will point to the peaking of the New Japan Empire very soon. Tadashi Tanaka. New York, New York.
Response from Dave Meltzer. Over the years I've talked with a lot of people regarding the Ali and Inoki, and I'm pretty sure the story in the August 14th issue was accurate, as I heard basically the same story from several insiders to the match over the years.
Independently, in the Ali biography by Thomas Hauser, which is an excellent and extremely accurate book, the story of Ali Inoki was related the same way.
I've heard many different versions of the Hogan Inoki match story, including the one mentioned.
The key point, whether or not it was a planned finish of that match or not, is that the post-match changed the face of wrestling in Japan, and the screwed-up finish in the rematch 1 year later only made a bad situation worse. NWA. The reason the NWA doesn't have the power and prestige of old is simply the promoters won't work together for the benefit of all. Most of the NWA promoters only care about themselves and getting themselves over. It's time to work together so we can make some of the money there to be made, rather than WWF and WCW having all of it. Cooperation is not only beneficial, it's crucial to the survival of the independents. NWA means cooperation to me. Sean Brown, NWA promoter, Chatham, Ontario. This is the end of this conversion. Be sure to comment and subscribe. See you next time.